Welcome back to the Foreign Desk. I'm Lisa Daftari. Tonight, we have another foreign policy power panel for you. We have an esteemed panel of guests who will give us analysis on the growing tensions between the U.S. and Iran, all while they're trying to court one another to get another nuclear deal. And the China-Iran deal, what does this mean? What are the implications, short-term, long-term? And what will it mean for the U.S.'s two top adversaries to cozy up together for the next 25 years? And without further ado, we will introduce our panelists for tonight. These three gentlemen who need no introduction, particularly in this field, superstars for sure. Let me start with Michael Rubin. Dr. Michael Rubin is a resident scholar at the American Enterprise Institute, where he specializes in Iran, Turkey, and the broader Middle East. He is a former Pentagon official who has lived in post-revolution Iran, Yemen, and both pre- and post-war Iraq. He spent time with the Taliban before 9/11. I'm sure that he has a lot to tell us about all these different experiences. Author of several books and a renowned scholar on the subject. And Mr. Bijan Kian, welcome back to the program. The twice confirmed advisor to the White House under 3 consecutive administrations, reporting directly to Presidents Bush and Obama, serving as the deputy lead on President Trump's landing team for the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, also an Ellis Island Medal of Honor recipient, and globally recognized expert on the economy and national security. And of course, Xiyue Wang, welcome back to the program as well. We had him on our podcast. He was the Princeton PhD student who was apprehended in Iran just months after arriving there to do research on his dissertation. He spent over 40 months in Iran's notorious Evin prison, and he is currently a fellow at the American Enterprise Institute, and he is battling the mullahs one tweet at a time. If you follow him on social media, he does tremendous work. Welcome to all of you.
Thank you, Lisa. Glad to be
Thank
here.
Gentlemen, we scheduled this program a few weeks ago when the Iran-China deal was announced, and we will spend a good amount of time discussing the ramifications of that deal. But it seems that since the time that that deal was announced, we've seen a lot of commotion coming out of Vienna. We have seen the U.S. moving faster than ever to try to secure a deal. And at the same time, we're seeing the Iranian regime flex their muscles more and more, believing they're the ones who have the leverage. Michael, I want to start with you. You know, why is it that we're seeing so much eagerness out of Washington? Do you think that we're going to get a deal this time around? How soon are they going to get the deal? And I mean, why with this speed? Why with this motivation?
Well, I think the enthusiasm for the deal is based on a false notion, a false reading of Iran, that this dichotomy between the so-called reformers and the hardliners actually matter. If you talk to people in the Biden administration, they're trying to rush a deal because they believe that by rushing a deal before Iran's elections, that they can somehow privilege the so-called reformers. The problem with this is twofold. First of all, that the difference between the reformers and the hardliners isn't substantive when it comes to national security. It's a case of good cop, bad cop. The other problem is that when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, and when it comes to terrorism, when it comes to any of the security-related issues about which the United States is concerned, that's in the hands of the unelected bureaucracy. And therefore, negotiating with Iranian president, foreign minister, and so forth over the nuclear program is like negotiating with the American Secretary of Agriculture over the nuclear program. It just doesn't work. But when it comes to the question of, Lisa, of how fast will this deal happen, look, we can reach a deal if we're willing to give the Iranians everything they ask for and more. But what I suspect the Iranians will do is recognize that the profit is in the process rather than actually coming to a deal. And therefore, they're going to try to drag out these negotiations as much as possible to take advantage of our desperation.
And speaking of that desperation, Bijan, I want to move to you. What is that calculation? What is the specific calculation that's coming out of the Iranian regime? And what are some of the markers that we're seeing do they actually have this confidence, or is it a false confidence on the global stage?
Well, look,
you addressed in the beginning of the program the idea of two imperialist rivals facing the United States, and I just, it humbles me to say that those two imperial powers are far better negotiators than we could even see. The reason I say that is because our history shows that. Back in 71, 72, Nixon going to China, we were hoping that would bring the communist China into the global community and everything is going to get better. And that has not really worked for us. As you know, we did not calculate that right. It's interesting you mentioned the word calculus. Yes, the work that we did was wrong because China has become more oppressive abroad and more oppressive at home and more aggressive abroad. And none of those assumptions have come true. Today, we see an aggressive imperialist China that wants to do the things that it's doing in American media, American corporations, American academic institutions. So the Iranians are carrying the same attitude. Ancient civilizations, they carry that pride that, we, some of it is natural, some of it is superficial, and most of it is superficial. Why? Because in 2016, they had $140 billion oil revenue. Now they're sitting on about $8 billion of oil revenue. They're running out of oxygen, is what it is. And if we are sitting in Vienna trying, instead of making a good deal, or instead of realizing that there is no good deal with this regime, it will not abide but by what they seem to be promising, if we continue the same mistakes, Lisa, and those dear listeners, I think the United States is going to buy 2 copies of the same newspaper on the same day.
I like that. In the meantime, last weekend, Iran's enrichment facility at Natanz was taken out by a cyber strike. They're blaming that on Israel. And in response, they come out and say, oh, you know what? Instead of 20%, we're going to move to 60%. They've made this announcement before, but now they feel justified to say, look, we've been hit, and now this is going to be our response to the world. Xiyue, this is a good question for you. I remember when you were on my podcast, you said one of the things that that you were given at Princeton, or were taught, you took this with you to Iran when you went to visit. You said, we feel guilt as Americans that we are imperialistic, that we're harsh. When you look at the optics of this and say, oh, wow, Iran was hit by an attack at one of their, at the infrastructure. And infrastructure is such a buzzword these days. It's one of those words that really make you feel woke, right? Infrastructure. Their infrastructure was attacked. Does it really give them more leverage on the world stage with this attack?
Well, I think we are giving them leverage that they don't deserve. I think that is the problem. Because knowing that the United States under the Biden administration is determined to go back to the deal, and then if you put yourself in Mr. Khamenei's shoes, so what are you going to do? You're going to do exactly that. So knowing your opponent is so determined to get that deal, you're going to jack up everything, all the demands that you have, and then why not? I mean, I think we should believe them if they want to do 90%, because they know the Biden administration is likely to take the bite, to take the bait.
Right. And because of that, the negotiations, it's surprising that they haven't been able to compromise already, because it seems like whatever they say, it's the Biden administration moves the goalpost to say, okay, we'll accommodate you on that. But we haven't seen the sanctions removed, but, they can just not enforce them. Michael, what are the best case, worst case scenarios that can come out of Vienna?
Well, the worst case scenario, of course, is that we will re-enter the deal. The deal won't address many of the loopholes which it didn't address back in 2015, and Iran will be left with an industrial-scale nuclear program and the controls upon it lifted. Remember, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the Iran nuclear deal in 2015, completely reworked counterproliferation precedent. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the legacy states like Ukraine, Kazakhstan, Belarus had to forfeit their nuclear weapons. In 1991, South Africa decided to come in from the cold with its covert nuclear program, and even with Nelson Mandela subsequently in power, it took the International Atomic Energy Agency 19 years to give South Africa a clean bill of health. In 2003, Libya had to physically dismantle the entirety of its program, and yet in 2015, we were so desperate for a deal that we left Iran with more P-1 centrifuges than Pakistan had when it built not a bomb, but an arsenal. So that's the worst case scenario. The best case scenario, honestly, is that we don't come to a deal and that the Iranians are going to continue to operate in a way which is going to expose them to sanctions. The best case scenario would be that we not lift sanctions so that the Iranians remain under pressure until the clock runs out on some of the Iranian leaders, or the drawn out negotiations leave more time for actions such as what we saw in Natanz last week.
Yeah, and hopefully, the sanctions that were put under the Trump administration were more targeted towards the regime and the sectors that are away from the main street economy as much as possible. We know that that's not entirely, possible, and of course the regime passes along that economic burden to the people. I always want to clarify that because I am of Iranian descent and I do feel for the Iranian people, but I also hear from them how much this pressure has helped them, or can potentially help them even more in their future political endeavors. Michael, I want to stay on with you for another question, follow up to this. We spoke about this off air, and I'm always curious to ask my guests who are, in the know about Iranian affairs and foreign policy about this. It makes no sense. If you bring someone from the moon and you tell them this is what we're doing with the Iranian regime. They're bullies and we don't like them. They're our enemies. They're enemies of almost every country in the Middle East. They're all their neighbors, and they're enemies to 80 million people back at home. But we will do everything we can to appease them. We took the Houthis off the terror list already in the first week of Biden's administration. We are bending backwards in every way. We've lined up all sorts of cabinet members that are going to be sympathetic to getting back into an Iran deal. And in every single way, we've let the Iranian regime know that we are on board and we are desperado. Why? Why is it? I mean, what's the bottom line reason for this, Michael?
Well, number one is simply self-flagellation on the part of the Americans. We don't understand that our adversaries have agency. It's not all about us. And yet the Biden administration and many within the Biden team are assuming that somehow we're guilty of original sin. The second reason for this is what I discussed before, that we really believe that the reformers are sincerely interested in reform. They're interested in a change of style, but not in a change of substance. And then the third and final reason is simply an ignorance of history. Some people will say maximum pressure doesn't work, although I can name two instances off the bat where maximum pressure did cause Iran to have an about face with what it took to release the American hostages back in 1981, who had been seized 444 days earlier, and what it took to end the Iran-Iraq war. But if we want to flip that over, we've tried to shower the Iranians with aid and assistance before. Between 1998 and 2005, the European Union more than tripled its trade with Iran. During the same period of history, the price of oil quintupled, and Iran took that foreign currency, that hard currency windfall, and took it to the bank and invested, by some estimates, up to 70% of that hard currency windfall in its ballistic missile program and its then covert nuclear program. And then the kicker on this is who was in control between 1998 and 2005? The so-called reformers, because we took our eye off the ball simply because we forgot that it doesn't matter what the Iranians say, it matters what the Iranian regime does. And in this case, again, the nuclear program is within the hands of the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps and the permanent security structure.
Bijan, at what cost are we doing all of this? I mean, from a foreign policy standpoint, you served under 3 consecutive, both Republican and Democrat presidents. And you know that we've always had, with the exception of under President Obama, we've always had a very steady and loyal relationship towards Israel, our main ally in the region. And so on the surface, we know that Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin traveled to Israel last week. We know Jake Sullivan doubled down on our promise to support Israel unconditionally. But on the other hand, we're just today, sources have said that Israel or the U.S. has gone out of their way to tell Israel to stop with the, sideline attacks, whether they're in Syria or at Natanz, because they do believe that it was the Israelis at Natanz, even though there hasn't been a formal confirmation of that. They're saying stop with these attacks because you are ruining our chances at an Iran nuclear deal. At what cost are we disrupting our relationships with others, particularly Israel, in the region, just to push forward with this deal?
Yeah, good question, Lisa. And you asked a very important KLP question of what price. And I am concerned and assured. I'm concerned because, as you say, this administration seems to be so bent on killing any positive legacy of Trump administration for whatever reason. They're so bent on killing all the legacies that we saw a funny instance. Actually, I kind of smiled when I saw Secretary Blinken, pretending that he could not remember the name of the Abraham Accord, something that for so many decades no other administration was able to do what the Abraham Accord has done, and he was pretending he's not important because he doesn't remember the name. But I'm also, today's warning to Israel is also concerning because it's a departure from a long-standing policy. Since when do we want to appease an enemy and upset a friend like this? But what assures me is that the state of Israel is not going to sit back and listen to advice from Washington or the direction, God forbid, because that's not going to happen. I'm assured that the state of Israel is going to do what the state of Israel needs to do to protect the people of Israel and to protect the country. So I'm with you. I understand this amazing appetite that I see in the current administration to just go after Trump policies. If they say maximum pressure doesn't work, wait a minute. Islamic Republic earned $100 billion in 2016, and current revenue is at $8 billion. How can anyone say that maximum pressure doesn't help? Of course, maximum pressure helps. Look what they are. They are getting on Clubhouse, they're getting on social media. Their foreign minister is just spewing lies as always. They're desperate. Their academicians, their think tanks are publishing papers saying, change the calculus using artificial intelligence language by saying, the algorithms have to be changed and all that nonsense. What algorithms? You have no power, Islamic Republic. And if the Biden administration just sits back to realize the Islamic Republic is at its lowest, weakest point, they would not be so meek, in my view, in negotiating. They'll be very strong. They will insist on things, and they will get it. I believe the Iranian government, the Islamic Republic government in Iran, is at weakest point. And what Michael said makes perfect sense. We should not give them the tools to raise the cost of national security on us on the next round. And if we do that, then shame on us. Because once again, we have proven that the Iranians are much better negotiators than we are in the United States. I don't believe that. I like to believe that we have very good negotiators who will wake up, who will realize this. I even want to believe, maybe I'm wrong, but I want to believe that the Islamic Republic has come to Biden administration and says, let's pretend everything is okay. Help us out. Lift our image a little bit. We'll have an election. We'll have a good guy now. The good guy is going to come and run the country, and that good guy is going to negotiate better. So leave your hard stuff for the good guy, but it's not going to happen. They just cannot afford. Sit back and ask yourself a question. Can the IRGC afford to get out of corruption? Is it even possible? Can they continue to live without corruption? I would say no. So I'm concerned, but I'm assured Israel will do what's good for Israel.
Yes, and they must. But speaking of giving them tools, if the United States doesn't do so, maybe China will. I want to move to speaking about the Iran-China deal. When we first, as I said, we tried to plan this program weeks ago when the China-Iran deal was announced to talk about the far-reaching implications of that deal. Xiyue, it seems like, outside circles like these, where the four of us find ourselves, there hasn't been much interest in this deal. The mainstream media didn't talk about it much. That's no surprise, obviously. But the Biden administration already had an uphill battle with both China and Iran. And now we see the two of them cozying up together. And for 25 years and for $400 billion, how significant is this deal?
Well, first of all, you have to know the deal. About the deal, a draft was leaked from Iranian government source last June. When the draft was leaked, the Chinese foreign ministry declined to comment at least twice when asked by foreign reporters. And then they remained reticent. There's not a single piece of analysis from a Chinese official source about the deal. And then my understanding from my contact in China and Iran, familiar with the situation, told me the Chinese government wasn't really interested in signing the deal, because imagine in mid-2020, it wasn't clear who's going to win the U.S. election. And then China is just like any other country. It's risk averse. When it comes down to its interest in Iran, it's largely commercial interest. And then commercial entities, businesses are wary of U.S. sanctions. So the U.S., the Chinese certainly did not want to put its eggs in a dangerous, precarious basket, that is Iran. So they waited and to see who's going to win the U.S. election and then what direction of U.S. policy orientation on Iran is how that's going to shift. And as it turned out, Joe Biden has won the election, and then you can see from a Reuters graph that the Chinese illicit purchase of Iranian oil skyrocketed since November 2020. And then, so in February 2021, China was buying 500,000 barrels per day, illicit purchase. By March, China was buying close to 1 million barrels per day. What does it tell you? I think it's fairly reasonable to say that the Biden administration isn't really enforcing oil sanctions on China, the Iranian oil sanctions. Because remember, during the Trump administration, we have brought down the Chinese purchase of Iranian oil almost next to zero, and steadily, right? There was agreement actually given by between the Trump administration and the Chinese that Trump would allow the U.S. would allow China to buy a certain amount of Iranian oil so Iran could pay China its debt. But on top of that, China effectively refrained from illicit purchase or official purchase of Iranian oil. So it's important that we have to ask why China is buying that much oil from Iran under Biden. And then talking about the $400 billion over 25 years, That's first of all, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said there's no concrete figures in the deal. The deal merely lays out a roadmap for future cooperation, and I think we have a good reason to believe that the deal lacks a substance. The reason being, if we put this in context, in the last 15 years, America, the United States of America, has been the top destination for Chinese foreign direct investment, and then China has invested per annum in the last 15 years, $12 billion in the United States. Can you imagine in next 25 years, if we average to per annum investment, China would have to invest $16 billion in Iran. That's significantly higher than the amount of China's investment in the United States in the last 15 years. How is Iran going to absorb that money, that much investment? What about political risks, right? What if in 4 years there's a Republican administration coming again, and then we reimpose sanctions? Or even without that happening, what if Iran itself, the regime, because the regime looks at its relation with the outside world in a zero-sum manner? What if it considers the U.S. returning to the deal as something that they have to exploit, and then they do something foolish, and then a step up of pressure, and then we restart some sort of a tension with Iran, even under Biden administration? I think that these are possibilities that can be foreseen. So will China be so unwise to put that much investment under this kind of political risk? I think that's largely questionable. But that being said, the deal also, we have to note, with the draft leaked out to the public for half a year, China did not sign the deal. And why did China sign the deal right now? So I think that it's very indicative, because the Biden administration is conniving China to get closer with Iran for future cooperation, because the Biden administration is so keen to return to the deal and to mobilize all kinds of leverages to help Iran, to improve Iran's bargaining power, both inside Iran and inside the United States. Now, after the deal was signed, the New York Times and Wall Street Journal published articles saying, well, now Iran has got closer to China, and Iran has got real alternatives to JCPOA, sort of create this kind of a public opinion circling in the major media outlets, created kind of urgency for the Biden administration to push harder for even more urgent return to the deal. I think that's kind of the most immediate effect of that deal.
Wow. I just want to underscore, because I want to actually follow up with you. I want to underscore what you said, because we don't hear this opinion often. You're saying not only did the Biden administration not flinch, not try to stop China from getting access to the entire Middle East through Iran, through $400 billion, through 25 years of investment, but they actually encouraged this deal in order to bring these two countries closer together.
Well, to what extent the Biden administration encouraged is hard to say. We don't have hard evidence, but judging from the trend, right? China didn't sign the deal under Trump. China signed the deal under Biden. China didn't buy Iranian oil under Trump. The numbers skyrocketed to about a million barrels a day by the end of March. What does it tell you? America under under Biden is not enforcing its sanctions on Iran when it comes to China purchasing Iranian oil, right? So I think that's clear enough incentive for China to go ahead and do the deal. From the perspective of the Biden administration, why not? If China does the deal, the deal will be lack of substance, but it will create such internal public opinion pressure to push for the more urgent return to the deal. I mean, isn't what the Biden administration is after?
Right. But they want it so badly, you're saying, that they would almost sacrifice, one foreign policy disaster in order to get back into the deal. But maybe I can ask you this question, since you know China and Iran so well. But have we gotten to a place where we can't curb China we just can't curb them? They have grown out of control. They are entirely unhinged when it comes to their investments all over the world, when it comes to their desire for hegemonic domination, whether it's in that part of the world or in Africa or in South America, and now in the Middle East, that they're basically saying, look, we already lost to China. We're not going to be able to curb them in a significant or meaningful way. So let us get them together with Iran. And if we normalize relations with Iran, we can just start, we can have this trifecta of just amazing trade. Let it just overflow. Let it be open to us.
Well, I would say that's like a dress or a nightmare, like a daydream, right? So to be fair, I mean, China is number 2 superpower, but its capacity is so far from number 1, that is the United States. But that does not mean that China does not want to project power. That does not mean China does not want to exert influence. And the problem, as I see it, in the Middle East is that it should be to the U.S. interest to contain Iran and to limit China's expanding influence. But what the Biden administration is doing at this moment, by re-engaging with Iran, realigning U.S. interest in the Middle East, but distancing from our traditional allies such as Saudi Arabia, Israel, and UAE, we're kind of flirting with Iran, right? And we're, in order to reach that goal, and then we bring in a Chinese influence onto the table. And then, just to be fair, at this moment, I don't think the Chinese influence is a real problem in the Middle East. We have to reckon for now. But if the trend goes like this, to appease Iran, we have to bring China in, and this is a recipe for a future problem, because we are creating a conducive environment for China to entrench first in Iran, and guess what? Once China does that, and because we're also distancing from our Middle Eastern allies, that will force our traditional allies to get closer, to work more closely with China. Again, in this context, and this is not to our interest. I mean, look at the recent development. China signed a huge joint venture with the UAE, right? Mm-hmm. In addition to this Iran deal, so China is expanding its interest in the Middle East. Are we trying to limit that, or are we trying to encourage that? And so, in my opinion, now we are encouraging that.
Right, Michael. If we follow the dots to what Xiyue's, forecasting in the Middle East, it doesn't look good. It looks like everyone is going to grow, and the U.S. will shrink, particularly with its influence in the Middle East and globally. Partially because of what we're already seeing in the new landscape of the Middle East, and now we're creating, in addition to that, more influence like China to be in the Middle East. As a historian, what do you think? This is maybe a bit difficult to forecast, or have a crystal ball, but as a historian, where do you think this will fit in the course of history? How important will this be? What are the short-term, long-term ramifications of this China-Iran deal, and how effective will this be in actually changing the course of the Middle East?
Well, I largely agree with Xiyue's analysis. look, as a historian, I get paid to predict the past, and my friends would say I only get that right about 50% of the time. And as you said, I don't have a crystal ball. I would say that there's a pattern inside Iran where there is always an attempt to make sort of a Hail Mahdi pass out to some third party. Back in the 19th century, it was the Austrians, then the Belgians, then the Americans, now the Chinese, in order to sort of allow Iran to bypass the difficulties which its own policies have gotten it into with regard to other partners. Xiyue is absolutely right, however, that it doesn't look like the Chinese are as serious about Iran as perhaps some of the public relations surrounding the Biden administration are suggesting they are. The other thing to keep in mind, if I can put on my history cap for a second and be a little bit of a nerd, you had the Iran-Iraq War from 1980 to 1988. That's when the Revolutionary Guard really became entrenched, really became powerful. Now, without moral equivalence, in 1988, you had a ceasefire, and the Revolutionary Guard didn't want to go back into the barracks. So they took their equivalent of the Army Corps of Engineers and merged it with their equivalent of Bechtel and Halliburton and KBR and Northrop Grumman and Boeing and ExxonMobil and Chevron and Walmart, and created this conglomerate which today controls about 40% of the Iranian economy. Now, this creates a problem both for the United States and for China. When it comes to China, you can try to make some broad deal with the Iranians to have a 25-year agreement, but the Revolutionary Guard doesn't want to give up its power, doesn't want to give up its monopolies, doesn't want to give up its control. At the same time, if you're the Biden administration and you decide you want to flood Iran with cash, who's going to get that cash? It's going to be disproportionately the Revolutionary Guard. So when we look at the Biden administration's rush to fund Iran and to shower it with incentives, the irony is that they are actually accelerating Iran's nuclear program rather than allowing diplomacy to solve the problem. Mm-hmm. Another way to look at it is we look at diplomacy as how to get to yes. The Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps looks at diplomacy as an asymmetric warfare strategy in order to tie our hands while they pursue their goals.
You know, is that by design? Do you think that that's an unintended consequence of the way that the Biden administration or previously the Obama administration handled their diplomacy? Is that, do they realize that, or meaning, are they trying to stop the nuclear program?
I do think that they are trying to stop the nuclear program. The problem is they're allowing partisan rhetoric and navel gazing to supplant the difficulties of actually negotiating a deal. It's hugely arrogant to believe that there's some magic formula out there that after 40 years, no one but them and a 40-something who's serving as a national security advisor who really hasn't traveled in this part of the world that could somehow just make up out of a boardroom. It really is a problem, and unfortunately, they're playing with lives. Now, when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, for me, the nightmare scenario isn't that Iran is going to act suicidal and launch a nuclear weapon at Israel or Saudi Arabia or the United States. What I worry less is that Iran is suicidal, and what I worry much more is that Iran is terminally ill. Because it's not Iran's nuclear program, it's the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps' nuclear program. And when you consider the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, they're not a monolith, and it's going to be the core of the Revolutionary Guard, which has been screened for their ideological purity, which is going to have command and control. Well, what happens if you have an uprising in Iran, like we've seen in 1999 and 2001 and 2009 and over the last couple of years, but the Revolutionary Guard or some of the security forces join in so that the regime's about to collapse. It only has 24 hours left. If we actually allow them to get nuclear weapons, then that as the regime collapses, the Revolutionary Guard and that core who are ideologically pure are going to figure, look, we're gone tomorrow anyway. Deterrence is off the table. It no longer matters. Now's our time. That's the nightmare scenario which we need to avoid. And if you talk to Israelis, if you talk to Saudis, That's the nightmare scenario which they consider. But unfortunately, we're going down the path to enable that nightmare scenario to take place.
Yes. You know what's interesting? You started with the Iran-Iraq war, and then it triggered something inside my mind about how, in the 80s, how the mullahs used that war to rally the Iranian people around the flag. But now what they're doing at the international table is actually inversely causing the Iranian people to turn away, whether it's the China-Iran deal that I hear day in and day out that the people of Iran are accusing their government of actually selling them out, selling the country, and giving the country away. And what they're doing with the Biden administration, or what they're doing with trying to get back into a deal. Many Iranians are they think it's lessening their chance of going out onto the streets, of making their voices heard like they were able to do in previous years. And Bijan, I want to end the program by asking you the reaction of the Iranian people to the Iran-China deal, and how, taking that into the future, and how they view their future, how they view their government, and how their movement has evolved, whether it's under Obama, Trump, and now under Biden.
Yeah, Lisa, I think this is great. If we average out what Michael is saying, what Xiyue is saying, what you're saying, I think we conclude that the China-Iran deal needs to be looked at from a different angle. There's a first expression that I'm sure Michael is familiar with. It's called the green door of the garden. We call it dare bagasas. The Chinese are masters at practicing this old negotiation technique, which you show your opponent in negotiations the green door to a garden, knowing full well there's nothing behind that green door. It's just a green door. There's no garden. But you keep saying there is a garden behind that door, and then you start taking advantages. Like, of course, the 4 areas that are in the 18 pages of this China-Iran deal, 25 years, which I think Xiyue and Michael have all both alluded to the fact that this may be more of a public relations campaign than a true economic cooperation. China is not going to forego its relationship with the United States and others just to be able to cozy up to a half-dead Islamic Republic. There is no future. China will not do that. Of course, I have to say this. There is no one who could say with confidence they're either naive or pretending to be naive if they put the malintentions of communist China as somewhat at a discounted level. No, I am not that naive person. Communist China has specialist imperialistic goals. They're doing everything they can. I'm not so worried
Bijan,
about
we're having a hard time hearing you. You're cutting out a lot. I don't know if it's.
Is it better now?
Let's see. It's cutting out quite a bit. Let me move to Xiyue for another question, and we'll come back to you if we can fix it, hopefully. Xiyue, I want to ask you, if you had the president's ear, both on China and Iran, what would you advise the president to do in a way that's constructive on both fronts, in curbing their growth and also, protecting the U.S. foreign policy and our assets?
Oh, well, great question. First of all, allow me to say China and America are both superpowers. And then although we have a lot of differences, we cannot, neither country can afford a head-on clash with the other. So we have to find ways to cooperate and then coordinate our policies. And I do think Iran is a place where we can do that. It's just that the Biden administration's approach by promoting or by conniving this China-Iran deal to happen is not the right approach. We can imagine what would have been a better approach. Right, so we can, in a situation, in an alternative situation, we can keep our pressure up against Iran to force the Iranian regime to negotiate for a comprehensive deal, right? And then we can work with China And we understand China has its legitimate interest in the region, its commercial interest, and then we can work with China and we say, for example, we allow you to continue to buy Iranian oil, just under just like what we allowed them to do under the Trump administration. You buy Iranian oil, but you cannot pay them dollars. You settle in renminbi, and then this you're dealing with Iran is only humanitarian food and humanitarian, right? And we can work with China on that to bring Iran to a compromise for a comprehensive and lasting deal. Why would China want to do that? Because China understands under the current situation, it cannot have its interest maximized in Iran because of a deep political risk of instability of what the Iranian regime would do, what America would do on Iran. So it is to China's long-term interest, in my opinion, to work with America, should America decide to pressure Iran to eventually create a better, more comprehensive, lasting deal with Iran. Then China can enter Iran just like any other international player and compete on more or less a fair basis in the local market. Like what China is doing elsewhere in the Middle East, right? So we see China is making a good inroads, commercial inroads in Saudi Arabia, in UAE, and then China understands with that kind of stability under a long-term deal, it's better for its long-term interest. So it is very likely China would come on board with us in that regard. But unfortunately, we have decided we want to go back to the deal no matter what. And then even at the cost of having China on board to appease Iran, which in my opinion is just a recipe for disaster. It's a really wrong-headed policy that really doing a disservice to the U.S. national interest, the Iranian national interest, and the Chinese national interest.
Yeah, absolutely. Mr. Kian, can we come back to you? Are we better now? Can you give us a quick synopsis?
I fixed my sound here. Is it better now?
It's still a bit choppy, but maybe you can give us a quick synopsis on where the people of Iran are at. We want to hear from them about, what there's such a big.
Did you hear the part that I was talking about the Green Door of God and the public relations campaign from China? Maybe coordinated, who knows? Maybe coordinated with the United States. But the reaction of people in Iran is very severe. They're not discounting the fact that communist China is a predator. Economically, traditionally, that's the way it's been. And Iran has natural resources, raw materials that they need. They're the biggest buyers of raw materials. Of course, they will continue doing that. And that's the first part of this 18 pages kind of illusion of you see it now, you don't see it now. Protocol, MOU, treaty is not. But, that's the first step is that people are concerned. The fishermen in southern Iran are seriously concerned that livelihood is affected because the Chinese ships are using vacuums to take life out of the Persian Gulf in terms of their livelihood. So they're really concerned. People are concerned that why? Even from the learned, the academics are sitting back and saying, why? You are at your weakest point. The weakest point you are. Why are you signing a 25-year contract? Of course, bottom line, there is no contract. There is no agreement. The foreign ministry from China is silent about it. They're not talking about it. And then Zarif says, the Chinese never talk about their deals. Sure, they never talk about their deals. That's not true, actually. They do talk about their deals. So the reaction is mixed. In Iran, people are concerned. They're very concerned. But could it be that the so-called China deal is a huge distraction needed to say, come on, vote for the guy that's going to stand up against the China deal and then build this. as a national momentum to bring people to the polls and make the election look like it's real,
Yes.
which it doesn't make a difference. Our election is not real; it's a sham.
Yes, I think one of the big takeaways here is that timing is never coincidental. Not for the Chinese, not for the Iranians. Everything that we're seeing is timed to for a particular agenda, for a reason. It's on their timeline. I know that our historian here can attest to that, and Xiyue Wang knows that very well, and also Bijan Kian. I thank you all very much for joining us tonight. A wonderful discussion. I hope to have you all back on our program.
Thank you for having us.
Very,
Good
very
seeing you,
soon.
Michael. Good seeing you, Xiyue.
And to the rest of you who'd like to sign up for our weekly podcast, you can subscribe at youtube.com/Lisa Daftari. And to sign up for our daily top 10 email, go to foreigndesknews.com/newsletter and you can sign up there. Thank you so much and have a wonderful evening.